What arete or power or possibility, um, in parentheses, virtue, the word has changed meaning so greatly. Arete, um, in the earliest attestations, is often linked to athletic abilities, feats, possibilities, capabilities, prowess. Um, are we to solace ourselves with amidst the gloomy idleness prior to uh, nuclear um, limited warfare, limited nuclear strikes? Um, Not to say that uh, I think there's very much real anticipation or projection of fear into that eventuality. There's almost none so far as I can see. Um, and if anything, quite a few people look on with uh, some pleasant anticipation, for at least there would be, in that case, a spot of excitement. At this moment, when Mr. Putin is showing so much restraint, as it seems to me, um, almost it's hard to imagine how he's thinking. Let's look at this question of the E prime language and the is of identity, um, touched on by this Polish interpreter. Up to an extent, I'll call him an interpreter of Heidegger, or at least somebody working in the 1940s in the um, wake of Heidegger's awakening of the Sein Frage, or the being question. Alfred Korobinski has first proposed the removal of the word be from his own writings, which he concealed for a long time, not wanting to be viewed as a crank or as somebody simply practicing some kind of eccentric literary game. But in order to clarify the use of language in something that is more geared towards a scientific methodos or art or dialectic or practice, scientific practice in linguistics, than it is towards sheer investigation, as with Wittgenstein's investigation of language. This practice shows some light on the general problem of which I think Husserl was the first to overturn in modernity, which is our tying to the apron strings of Aristotelian thinking, which Kant had made in a very emphatic way clear, had remained largely the same for more than 2,000 years, more than two millennia up to his time. Aristotle himself had been conscious of his conception of science as basically proceeding out of the notion of causality and the things moved by various conceptions of causality, so that everything hangs on what we're calling causality, the AITI, this question of the what and the what it's made of and the what it's for. the how it happens, which have largely been set aside in our most dominant locus of our Dasein, which is the thinking of science as causal science in the sense of experimental causality, in the sense of it works, quote unquote, it works, or success. The experiment has come off. We've been able to synthesize plastic, be able to create plastic in the field of chemistry, or we're able to make the combustion engine work, or something works. This notion of the so-called instrumental causality, which, however, in sensu stricto, is not necessary for theoretical physics, because theoretical physics can set aside any thought of causality and use functional equivalencies. X equals f of x. It doesn't require strictly a line of time where one thing causes another. Okay, so the problem with the E prime, it seems to me, is this one, we're still conscious of the being problem, right? But we're only trying to introduce an art, as it were, or a calculative method to exclude it in certain cases, especially in this case where you want to exclude identity situations. So you won't say Heidegger is a great philosopher, is a great philosopher, so that you come up with a universal philosopher. But rather you would do something like, I think Richard Rorty has developed this concept, if I'm not mistaken, of saying, when I say a philosopher, I mean someone who has studied Thales, Anaximander, Immanuel Kant, Quine, John Searle, whoever is supposed to be a philosopher. So being a philosopher is not the is of a identity of a universal, but it's rather somebody who we could describe without the is as saying something like, this is someone who reads and thinks about and brings into practice the work of X, Y, and Z, and so forth. The E prime language attempts to escape, therefore, the difficulties of both the methexis problem in Socrates, Plato, and the problem of the one and the many, already initiated, the problem of aggregation initiated by the Pythagoreans, and the most preeminent version proximate to us is the analysis by Wittgenstein. We have the book, I have yet to study it carefully, is the book on Wittgenstein's last work on certainty, which seems to have some pertinent investigations on this problem of the universal. Basically that it's impossible to show the concrete meaning of the identity. One can only show, as it were, difference. You have two redwood trees. This one, why are they the same? You attempt to isolate certain features, just as with an abstract identity. You could do it with a human being by positing the arte or power or possibility of so-called reason and linking that to speech, and then claiming that speech is, as an abstract noun, which works with the universals, only belongs to the human being. And so we're already ensnared in difficulties, because we have to appeal to this claim to bring into presence this abstract universal, which then gets loaded with content in one way or another, so that ultimately we wonder if the is even necessary here. The main thing I want to bring out here in this initial thrust about this E prime issue is my feeling is that this is a technique of turning the problem of being into a technique, the question of being into, in fact, turning the question of being into a problem. Let's say a problem with an answer. There's a problem of being. Identity is leading to inconsistencies, leading to apparent contradictions, where contradiction is supposed to be an error, but actually, if we describe rather than posit this abstract universal, then we get out of the difficulty, and we should proceed that way. And so it's a prescription about how to use being, but it's a kind of technical solution. I think I was reading recently about Arthur Eddington having scored first in his class as a so-called wrangler in Cambridge. This is at the 1880s or so. Cambridge used to have a very powerful battery of tests which went on for 5 days or so in mathematics for 50 hours or something like that. He was first in the class at a very young age, and then he was assigned on the basis of his mathematical prowess to the Astronomer Royal's staff, but he knew absolutely nothing about the technical apparatus of doing astronomy, so he had to take some time off and study the techniques. This sense of the technological essence as the grasping of techniques, which are almost like knacks, which are things that almost anyone can learn, and once you master them, they sink into the background, and you no longer need to think about them. The whole world as technique, to be contrasted against the world as being. We lose that kind of problem in a way. For instance, chess. Is chess merely a matter of technique or knack, such that if you look at how the best computers or the best computer engines are playing chess, eventually it will be exhausted just as checkers, and chess will prove to be very little different than checkers, except vastly more complex. And you see that it was just a technique that could be mastered in a mechanical way. This contrast between techniques that can be mastered in a mechanical way and the so-called causality, which doesn't need to be directly applied to that, but this hanging over interpretive power of Dasein outside of that, it seems to me, in a way, the E prime solution, where we'd still be aware of the notion of being, but we just have turned it into a problem with an answer rather than a question, which remains, and we have to wrestle with, like Jacob with the angel, so that this anticipation of becoming Israel, no longer Jacob, of defeating the angel of the revelation or the apocalyptic sense, that of a breakout of techne, of a breakout of the dogmas that connect to techne, and of the direct access to the phenomena. This sense seems to be lost so far as we treat linguistic problems as scientific experimental problems. There was, I think, on Worlds Apart, on the Oksana Boyko program on the RT a couple of years ago, there was a linguistics scholar that showed how language change behavioral changes, and there were many experiments done and many concrete examples of how things such as now, of course, we have the pronoun problem. Things such as changing in pronouns lead subliminally to changes in behavior. So it strikes me that the E prime is like the change in the pronoun issue, but it's on a different, it has also all these logical or art or technique it conveys all these problems to do with more general problems of technique, method, dialectic, etc. But nonetheless, it's in a way mainly a behavioral issue, which brings us right into the technological essence, and could be handled by a computer, but it leaves out the interpretation of the question rather than the problem, and therefore it doesn't get us to the same position where Wittgenstein and Heidegger bring us with regard to our Dasein, with regard to fundamentally trying to overcome the liberal essence, which is a boring essence in the sense that it posits nothing in life which is of genuine seriousness, so that Dasein can pursue it without being reminded of its triviality within this sort of problem, which is really just if everything's just a technical problem, of course the computers can do it better than us, and it sort of obviates the reason for our existence, so that one wants to find the genuine human problems, which taken in the traditional way is sort of like saying there's a certain seed that wants to become a sequoia tree, a redwood of a certain kind, giant redwood, and there's the human, and whatever Dasein is, it has some genuine tendency, let's say, that it's wants to struggle with and realize and go into that direction, and the whole of Dasein must seek its right struggle in that sense. I would say hopefully Alexander Dugin is in some way, as a passionary, bringing us into the right direction in this respect. Zizek, on the other hand, I think should take stock of his position, and I would ask that he would make every attempt not to discount Dugin's side of the arguments as merely an interested position in something which is sort of dishonest, but try to take it as confront it, Auseinandersetzung, as much as possible, and try to see the question in it, the genuine question in it. It's clear to me that at the very least, Dugin is a sincere man, so you can't, but that doesn't mean he's not mistaken, obviously, but he doesn't seem to be. I think that one needs to only look into the issue, and then the old liberal position becomes tangibly shaken in its foundation.